All right, well, let's talk about the task of change.
Oh man, these are so good. So the task of change, and I should have it right in front of me. It is from Robert. I think I got his name right. Robert Evans. He wrote a great book on school culture and understanding schools. And he presented this modality of helping helping schools navigate change. And I loved his construct so much that I have applied, like for me, it has such great application just beyond just the school, like for a school perspective. And so great book. But this is where this comes from. The unfreezing is probably one of the most critical things for anyone to understand in regards to a leadership role. Is the idea of unfreezing is if you want change to happen, or you want, healthy change to happen, you got to increase the fear of not trying and reduce the fear of trying. There's another slide that really goes deep on this, but it is the most critical aspect for change management. As we all know, we've gone through significant change here at Christian Heritage the last 3.5 years, not just from a leadership perspective, but the programmings that we're offering. I mean, we are not the same organization that we were 3.5 years ago in terms of, our identity is still very much the same, but the way we operate, our goals have shifted, our outcomes have shifted. If we haven't tackled intentionally this unfreezing, then everything else will fall apart. It really will. So you want to increase the fear of not trying. I got to get people out of that old wineskin. If I want them to get into a new wineskin, and I want that, by the way, I don't want to just discard people, but I have to do that by increasing the fear of not trying. And then I got to reduce the fear of trying. So that's really critical. And we have another slide to talk about that. You've got to move from loss to commitment. So with any change, we experience loss, any change. And part of that is this process of like, how do I go from this new normal? So how do I go from a loss to commitment? Is I have to make change meaningful. Change has to be meaningful, or I will reject the need for change. I will stay in my loss. I won't move to a new level of commitment at some level if we're not making that meaningful, making change meaningful. There's the aspect of moving from old competence to new competence. So when you change anything, well, are you telling me the way I've been doing it for the last 20 years is no longer working? Yeah. And so we're so attached to what has been successful for us. We have a very difficult time shifting into a new competence. And so to do that, you have to be aware of that. And again, I think organizations oftentimes shoot themselves in the foot. Churches shoot themselves in the foot because we just expect people's like, well, hey, you've had a whole day or you've had a week to undo everything you've been doing for the last 10 years, and you need to adapt to this immediately. Man, that's just being super insensitive to that. And we can miss out on the beauty of, man, giving that person time, you kind of make that change in transition. You might even tap into new things that they didn't even know that they had, but you have to be somewhat patient with that process of change for people. And people will get there at different times and different periods. But again, we're asking them to develop new behaviors, new beliefs, and new ways of thinking. That is not an overnight process. It really isn't. You can't microwave that process, but you have to be aware of that from a leadership perspective.
I mean, whether we like it or not, we do attach ourselves and our identity to what we produce.
Right.
And right or wrong, we do that as humans because we feel like I've put my blood, my sweat, my tears into this process, this system, this technique, this strategy, whatever it is, it's worked. Now it doesn't work. Does it mean I'm a failure? No, it just means it's time to move on. But we just attribute our identity to that.
Right. Well, it's, I think post-COVID, regardless of what you think about it, it has ushered in a whole new world for many people. And I think people actually are working through these actually tasks of change, whether you're an organization or a person.
Well, that gets to the next one, right? Moving from confusion to coherence.
Right. Absolutely. So so from moving from confusion to coherence, it is going to require a realignment of structures, functions, and roles. So it might require a new org chart. It might require, a refreshing of your job descriptions, making sure that, again, it's not just what we believe about who we are as an organization, it's what the market believes about who we are as an organization. And the market is really volatile these days. It's not the same market, regardless of the industry, church, nonprofit, for-profit, our family. There's so much change that's going on. And so we, just to think that the old structure will continue to work in a new world is a failure to really lead well. And I would say is a failure to flourish in the midst of all of that. And then moving from conflict to consensus. So ultimately you want to generate broad support for change. You got to have everybody on board with that. And so you've got to have to be very open, transparent, about that conflict as well. But you want to move towards consensus. So I talk about unfreezing. So we talked a little bit about this already. It is the linchpin for change, in my opinion. If people don't see the need to change, they will not. Our human tendency is to maintain homeostasis. Like we're constantly fighting to
being static. That's what that means. Yeah,
exactly. And so, but we're navigating that all. We navigate this every day. That's why we might get angry or frustrated when we're in a line or, because our human tendency is to maintain that. Our systems and processes are designed to resist change. They just are. And so we have to understand that about the way that we build systems or strategic plans or, what we understand about the Bible. And again, I think this is what's so interesting to Jesus, coming onto the scene and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, although Jesus was fulfilling every prophecy that they were super aware of, man, their systems of process were designed to resist the coming of the king, right? So it's everywhere we go. It's every system that we're encountering. You just understand that it is resistant to that, to change. We start the change process by challenging our view of ourselves, our performances, and those receiving our services. So one way that helps unfreeze that, are people better off because of what we're doing? And if people are not better off, so there are some things that we did here at Christian Heritage internally when we started looking at our processes and we started looking at our outcomes. And what we saw was we weren't okay with our outcomes. And so either something had to change. Either we changed our outcomes or we had to change our process. It was a massive disconnect. And so we decided, no, the outcomes are what they are. We've got to improve our processes so we can achieve the right outcomes. The outcomes won't, but you've got to be able to do that. You've got to be able to do that work, and you have to do that work not in isolation. Like I can't do that in isolation as the CEO. Yep. You can't do that in isolation as, the director of, like you've got to do focus groups. You've got to open up that table to get as many opinions in that. And they need to feel, going back to what we've talked about, they have to feel safe. There's got to be a trusted relationship and connection to really get to then, the heart and meat of honest assessment and making sure that there's right alignment. So I love this quote by Robert Evans in the book. He says, people must be dissatisfied with their present state and their role in maintaining it, or they have no reason to endure the losses and challenges of change. I want to say that again for our people who are listening.
Yep.
People must be dissatisfied with their present state and their role in maintaining it, or they have no reason to endure the losses and challenges of change. And can I tell you, although that is true as an organization and change management, that is true as an absolute son of the living Lord. Oftentimes, I just think in my sin and my own stubbornness and my own selfishness, man, sometimes God just, his rescue plan lets me sometimes stay in the pit.
Yep.
And because why? Because I need to be dissatisfied with my present state and the role that I have and being in that present state, because ultimately the Lord wants me to be surrendered and committed to his purposes. And so I then can endure whatever, not just endure the losses and challenges of change, but I can ultimately become what the ultimate outcome is so I can represent and be more like Jesus. So I think there's a lot of great, incredible spiritual and biblical application to how we think about and managing change, even on a sin level, but even as an organization level.
I don't know if this is the right time to say this, but I think you're familiar with this quote from Dallas Willard. Your system is perfectly designed to yield the result you are getting. And I think that's from his book, The Divine Conspiracy. But it made me think of that quote when you talked about our systems and processes are designed to resist change. And if we want to grow, if we want to adapt, if we want, as an organization, like we want to serve these people this way, even in a secular market, right? If we want to get this product or this service into the market this way, like what you have right now is perfectly designed to yield the result you're getting. So if you want to grow,
right,
you got to change your system.
That's right.
But our systems are designed to resist the change. So you have to go back to what you were talking about before, and you have to evaluate and be honest. I really like that question you said about what the new people think.
Right.
We've all been the new person.
Right.
And you're like, what's going to help us get unstuck? Let's ask some newer people. What's weird about what's going on here? Oh, well, I'm glad you asked. And then be ready to shut up and just listen to them without defending,
right.
So at one point I was new here. I'm not new anymore. I've helped you and the other leaders here create the culture. So now when we have a new person come in, you can say, hey, our system is designed to get this result. It's what we're getting. We want to go here, A, B, C, X, Y, Z, whatever that is. Why do you think we're stuck? So what's going to get us unfrozen?
And this is where I think as organizations, it's helpful to bring someone from the outside in, whether that is, hey, we want to hire a consultant. I cannot tell you, being at lots of different organizations, how oftentimes a lot of money will be spent on a consultant who will come in and shed light on what they need to do. Can I tell you, less than 5% of what needs to be done will ever be done? Yeah. And part of that is because the way that things are designed strategically is resistant to that level of change. And so one of the things that would be a warning or a yellow flag for me if I was working with an organization is, when was the last time you sought outside perspectives, or when was the last time you hired someone from the outside? Well, we do all of our hiring internally. I'm like, okay, so I would just say is then you're not really looking at, I think the systems and processes are designed to resist anyone with a new perspective and objective to that. And again, that's not the be all for that, because you can read books as an organization and say, okay, we're going to read through this book because it's going to challenge some of our precepts. Like, I think there's multiple ways to challenge the system and process. It's not always through a new employee, but I do think that is a behavior of how are we always seeking outside opinions and thoughts about who we are as an organization. And so there's lots of ways of doing that. But I think to understand that, but if you're recognizing right now that you're not a flourishing organization and you designed to be, you've got to understand the dynamics and culture around that unfreezing process. Because I could say today, James, hey, we're implementing this new policy because I see a problem. But if I haven't done my homework, if I haven't listened, if we're not doing the regular surveys, all I've done is actually reinforce those systems and processes that probably need change, or I'm going to lose a lot of staff through that because I'm not getting the buy-in that I need either. And so there's a lot of different things that, people can, handle change. So I'll give an example, being someone who's come into a couple of organizations that I think about my time at Camp Monadnock. When I think of coming here at Christian Heritage, I'm not from Nebraska. I wasn't from New Hampshire. I'm coming in, I'm learning camp, I'm learning foster care. Those are significant systems and, organizations that I'm trying to learn. And kind of the approach would be is, as a leader with change, it's a revolution or is it evolution? I'm a bigger believer in the evolution part of that, because I want the buy-in. And if I can help maintain the identity of an organization with the people that were here previously to me, and I can get their buy-in to that and help them through those tasks of change, we will be a stronger, more robust organization in the long term. I believe that. But there are times where a revolution is necessary when, if those systems and processes are so designed to resist change, then ultimately, if I don't have the power and authority, then it's not going to work. Which, by the way, I think this entire process is why most churches who bring in a new pastor do not work, because they do not understand the unfreezing process. I don't think there's a healthy way of looking at that. And that means onboarding your elders and your deacons and your leadership structure to making sure that, man, as you bring this pastor in, he better be aware of all of these things too, of what he's walking into, because ultimately that culture is going to dictate whether or not that pastor is successful or not, if you do not have the buy-in from those who are managing those systems and processes.
Yep. I love that.
So
I think we kind of hit.
Yep.
Do you have any comments you want to make on that?
Yeah,
slide?
I just, again, if the change threatens my whole self, I will deny the data and the need for change.
Like I said, I was getting at, my identity is in my work.
Yep.
And I mean, that could even be for a leader, right? Like,
oh, absolutely.
Oh, I built this over the 15 years. Maybe you weren't in the day-to-day, but we got to change now. COVID did that to everybody, and everybody's in shambles because you have to adjust.
Well, let me give a great example of this. And we practice this here. You know, we've done what's called a fishbowl activity, which has me as the CEO, basically surrounded by my senior leadership team. And the senior leadership team gets to say, hey, this is one thing I appreciate about you, but here is an area of room of improvement that I see in you. And man, talk about the level of felt safety and trust that we have as a team, James. So I think about the relationship that we have, and all I can say in response to that is I can't defend my position. All I can say is thank you. And I make sure that I take those notes down. And then my goal is, as a CEO, is to work towards whatever that might be. I might need to seek clarity after we do the fishbowl activity. But when I think that, I came back in May, James, and you as a senior leadership team, we sat down and we had a really great heart-to-heart conversation around where's the organization and what is needed, not just for me, but from everybody. And I think when you think about change, if I am resistant to change, if I feel like that change threatens my whole self, and I don't have the level of trust that I need to have with my team, with the senior leadership team, then I will deny the data and the need for change. And I think this is what disrupts so many leadership structures in an organization is, if I'm feeling threatened by something, do the work of understanding, why do I feel threatened by this? Why? And what do I need to do about it? And I think, and again, I love the quote. It says, only if I can feel that I retain my identity or my integrity, am I open to learning something new or make the change. Will I even be able to contemplate it? So this goes back to, for me, what's so important about being trauma-informed and responsive. Like when we think about trauma-informed and responsive, does that mean everyone that we interact with has trauma? No. What it does mean is, I, as someone who's listening or seeing things, I use that as a lens or filter, which ultimately helps me navigate. Like if they don't trust me and they don't feel safe with me, we're never going to get to the heart of the issue. And we're simply going to be putting Band-Aids on things. And I think, again, those are can be so corrosive and corruptive to being truly the flourishing organizations that we long to be. So again, I think unfreezing is the linchpin to change management and understanding who we are and then how we lead really well.
All right. Well, let's talk about felt safety now.
Yeah. So
you got a quote from the godmother,
the godmother
Dr. Karen Purvis.
Dr. Karen Purvis, right? Just go right to the top. So again, when we talk about felt safety, again, this is TBRI. So trust-based relational intervention. It's not just, again, a program we offer to our kids.
It's a paradigm. It's a
paradigm by which we are trying to implement through all of our organization. But I love this quote from her when we think about, okay, now that we understand these tasks of change and working through this, so what do we do? Like, what do we do? And so for me, we're now going to shift into just some really practical things of understanding, okay, what would be a trauma responsive or trauma informed response to working an organization through change and becoming ultimately a connected organization. So felt safety means that adults arrange the environment and adjust their behavior so children can feel in a profound and basic way that they are truly safe in their home and with us. and this is really the key part of this, until a child experiences safety for his or herself, trust can't develop, and healing and learning won't progress. We offer felt safety so healing may begin. And so everything that we've just talked about, James, if there is some level of not felt safety within the organization, there's not trust. Trust can't develop, and then healing and learning won't progress. So for me, this really comes down to, how do we feel about the organizations, the churches, the families that we're living in? How do we feel safe within those environments? So in TBRI,
and I'll say, for those of you who don't know, you and I with Emma, our foster care director, we did a whole podcast on felt safety.
We did. That's right.
I will link to that in the show notes, so you can get, kind of double click on that, and you can expand your knowledge, because it was a great conversation we had. Yeah. And we did one on, I think we did one on connection. We did one on all the kind of the pillars of trauma-informed care probably a year or so ago now. So I'll link to those in the notes.
That'd be great.
You can find those.
That's fantastic. Cause there's a lot in that would be really helpful to this conversation. So one of those pillars of TBRI is connection. And really, when I think about this from an organization perspective, this is the pillar that we're going to focus on. So the goal of connecting principles is to build trusting relationships that help children and youth feel valued, cared for, safe, and connected. So disarming fear and building trust greatly increases the capacity for connection, growth, and learning. So again, this is true, again, not just for a child, but for us as adults. So I kind of love from TBRI, they talk about, so remember that secure attachment says, I feel protected, I feel precious, I feel heard, my physical needs are taken care of, my emotional needs are taken care of. And again, from a culture perspective, like if you could gauge your employees of, hey, do you feel protected? Do you feel precious? Do you feel heard? Like, I think there's some really cool things of, wow, let's assess our organizations around kind of these statements and grade that on a scale. It would be fascinating what you would learn about how connected people feel within the organization.
And it might be even weird for some people to have them be asked that question. They might,
I know, right?
Do I feel precious? Like, what is this?
This is a Lord of the Rings episode.
Yes. But it's like, I think that it feels weird because a lot of us have never been asked that, but it should be normal to hear those. Do you feel heard? Do you feel protected? But we don't hear those in a work environment ever.
Right. You're right.
And so to make it the norm, to make it a regular thing, it will become not weird. And it will be a great thing for people to be like, yeah, around here, we ask regularly if you feel protected and heard. And a new person's going to go, I kind of want to work here now. I haven't gotten that anywhere else.
Right. And I would think at some level, this goes back to, people's current employee experience is really poor. And part of that is validation, not feeling like they have a voice. And again, TBRI is very active in, building that kind of connection as well. So here's some principles of connecting. It's balancing nurture and structure. And we're going to get into each of these more. It's balancing nurture and structure. It's using scaffolding. And so scaffolding is an important aspect of this, that whatever I'm building or changing, I'm building the right things around that change, or the kind of the rebuilding of that. I'm building scaffolding around it to stabilize it, to help that change actually stick. So, right, just think of any building you've been out, you see scaffolding around it. It's not only to help do the work, but it's at some level protecting the people who are walking around the work too. So thinking about using scaffolding around some of that change is just super important. Being present is huge. It's giving voice. It's being curious. And I can't wait to unpack that one a little bit more. It's meeting needs. It's taking play seriously. So how does play, how do you think about play within the context of your organization or where you work? Responding thoughtfully. And then I love the last one. It's just repair, reflect, and readjust. We've talked a lot about that and already with, kind of change management. So here's some just really practical steps into becoming. Is you have to, so for me as a CEO, I need to set the agenda. So you need to know your as is. So where are we at today? and to project your desire to be, when and where you will be in the future. So you've got to really answer, that question. So I need to do an honest assessment of my culture, where we're at as an organization today. So there's a lot of work that goes into where are we at today and having an accurate assessment of that. And then desiring, just like, but where do we want to be? Our behaviors, our norms, or so it's not just, hey, we want to reach, 300 kids. And we've talked about this. Like, I don't want to just say, hey, we've impacted, say, 300 kids in foster care this year, or 100 kids in families together. Yep. That's not the measure. That's a measurable outcome. But what's more important to me, and I think it's true for us as a senior leadership team, it's how we go about doing that. Yep. We want that to be redemptive. We want to flourish through that, not be, heavy-handed in that, or destructive in that, or employees feel like, man, I'm not valued at all, man. As soon as I go, they're just going to fill that empty space, so they can just be all about the number. Yep. And that's not how we want to do that.
Yep.
So set the agenda. You do that by knowing that. You also set the agenda by counting the cost, and then to what end. So you have to really count that cost. And again, this is a very powerful scriptural understanding, or biblical understanding. We find this in the New Testament, is you got to count the cost. You got to know, yep, before you set course, of doing your due diligence of, am I willing to pay what's ultimately needed to achieve the outcome? You've got to know what that is. Yep. And then providing a clear vision of what those desired outcomes are. So the leadership has to do this, by the way. They've got to be the ones that set the agenda. And then you're going to set the structure around that agenda. So this is really where scaffolding is really important. How do our roles, processes, systems, interactions, communication, the way we delegate, the way we make decisions, how we problem solve, like, you've got to set the structure for then how you're ultimately going to, achieve the ultimate outcome with that. So you've got to set the structure for that. And that, again, is both formal and informal ways that, of understanding that. One of the things that Edgar Schein talked a lot about in change management, James, and I think there's such truth to this, is I believe there was a survey of over 500 kind of Fortune 500 companies, and they looked at those organizations that run through significant change, and the ones that were successful at it didn't just deal with the hard skills, right? Yep. The new programs, the new job descriptions, the new roles. Most of those who just focused on that were not successful at the change. It was the ones that actually focused on the soft skills. So it's that emotion. For me, it's what I would say is the emotional relational safety. It's that trust. It's those kinds of things that ultimately sets up the hard structure well. So and again, we've talked about this from a faith perspective, James. It's not just making sure my kids go to church. It's not just doing devotions every day. It's not just, praying every day. I mean, those are important, but it's actually the parental and relational warmth between a parent and child that activates faith, right? Yep. It's the same thing. It is like, as I set the structure, I got to control the process. So that's the third step. Controlling the process is really understanding trust. It's understanding felt safety. It's understanding relational safety in regards to ultimately setting the agenda, setting the structure, but then it's controlling the process by which that is done, because you want that to be healthy. Yep. If the change is unhealthy, people will reject it, right? If you're not helping people maintain their identity integrity through that, they will reject it at the end of the day. And so you've got to help control that process in regards to that. So those are just kind of practical steps. So again, I kind of got into this already, probably jumped ahead of myself a little bit, but if you go back to that slide. Yep. So set the agenda. So perception is reality. You need to be listening. You need to know your desired outcomes and to what end. What and who do people value? Like, at what cost? Who and what drives decision making? And then, do people feel safe to express their ideas, thoughts, and feelings? So those are just really practical thoughts around how to do that. And again, just a few extra additional points with stuff that I've already covered, but just some really important ones there. So other practical steps when it comes to, into becoming a connected organization is really this balance between nurture and structure. So you want to use nurture to cultivate trust, but you need structure to cultivate growth. So I think those two are kind of go hand in hand with setting the agenda and controlling the process, right? Setting the structure and the process is, again, I love this. Use nurture to cultivate trust, but use the structure to cultivate growth.
Yep.
And you do that by routines and rituals. So one way to do that is, here are our new routines. Here's our new normals.
Yep.
This is, I need you to buy into this process. And that's really important.
Yep.
When we talk about scaffolding, again, I talked about the importance of scaffolding, is you've got to set appropriate expectations. There's got to be a level of accountability that comes with becoming that organization. You've got to support skill building. So if you're asking people to get new competencies, you've got to help them build those new competencies. You've got to help them build the new skills. You have an obligation to do that, helping them get there. And then you've got to practice outside the moment. So it's not just me, like you need this to be kind of a core value of who they are and how they process. So you don't want it just to be all because I have to sit in this meeting and blah, blah, blah. Like you're kind of playing at lip service, but that's all you're doing. You're not completely got your heart into that as well. Being present, it's being physically present, it's being emotionally present, it's being attuned. It's really your ability to read a room or reading conversations. Like, and that means, if you need to say, hey, in our meeting, no cell phones. It's like, I need you here. I don't want you working on your computer. I think it's just really assessing some of those behaviors in terms of, are those things contributing to a healthy or an unhealthy culture? Giving voice. It's sharing power, it's offering choices, and it's offering compromise. Those who are really insecure in their leadership might have trouble with this one. But I know one thing that we've really have tried to do here at Christian Heritage is empower decision-making the whole way down through the organization. And so we share power very differently than what we have in the past. And part of that is giving voice and choice over our policies, how we operate day in and day out. Being curious. I just love this one, to be honest with you, because I think sometimes, systems that are resistant to change are probably not super curious. So I think you've got to be mindful of history of the organization. I think you've got to be mindful of attachment and those systems, and then being mindful of the why. Like, why do we do what we do? Well, it's the way we've always have done it. And by the way, that's the way you need to be doing it. Like, you're not a curious organization. You've got to be mindful of those things. And the more you're mindful, it generates this curiosity of, well, is that really effective? Is that really helping us reach our outcome? It's not, but it's a big part of what we do, right? A quick example of this is a church's identity was Awana. We're an Awana church, or we're Awana, and by the way, I love Awana. Don't see that as a bad thing, but their identity as a church was tied to a program. Can I just tell you that is dangerous?
It is.
What I would say is, as a church, we want to reach young people, or we want to reach our youth, or we want to reach families. By the way, Awana is a great way to do that. But to attach your identity to a program is super and I think those are the things where, when you lose the curiosity of those things, then you can start having mission drift and drifting away from kind of who the core of who you are as a church or as an organization. Another aspect of becoming a connected organization is just meeting needs. How are you meeting the emotional and physical needs of those that you are working with? Play is a big part of this. And I have to say, I struggle with this one. Me too. I can be so mission driven that I forget that it can be fun along the way. And so this is one I have to say, I have to work on, is how do we play to connect, and how do we play to cultivate growth? And I think that's really important. Part of becoming a connected organization. That's not just true for kids. That's true for the kid in all of us, I think, at some level, James. Respond thoughtfully, practice the pause. For me, this is James, where it says, be slow to speak, be quick to listen, slow to anger. We need to respond thoughtfully sometimes. And I don't think we do. I think this is an area of growth. I think growth probably for any organization for any family. You know, funny, we had that verse on it's like, hey, we have a family verse this year, and I think it's James 1:27. I might get that. Maybe I'm confusing that with widows and orphans.
Yeah,
That's widows and orphans.
it is, but yeah,
James 1 something. Maybe it's James 1:5-9. I don't know. Well, you probably could Google it for me real quick.
1:19.
1:19. Yep. There it is. James 1:19. That's really bad for considering that one verse was going to be for a year, ended up being on our for
but
how 3 years.
Awesome that you guys are like, our family verse is going to be slow to speak and quick to listen, be slow to be angry. Yeah, I love it.
You know why? Because we weren't necessarily responding thoughtfully to each other, right?
Yep.
And that became a really big part of who we are as a family, because we can be so strong-willed and we can be so stubborn. You know, my kids, they didn't get that out of the multiverse. I mean, that came directly from my wife and I. And so, but part of that is a part of our organization. If we want to be a connected organization, that we do then as an organization need to practice the pause, use communication thoughtfully, and use the appropriate redirection. And we've talked a lot about that here. You know, you and I've talked about the redemptive parts of who we are. Like at the end of the day, we need to be redemptive and gracious and merciful in regards to the way that we go about our day to day. If we lose sight of that, then we lose sight of being a faith-based organization.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then I love the repair, reflect, and readjust. It's repairing after a rupture, because there's going to be ruptures. There's going to be conflict. There's going to be at times failures. How do you repair? I mean, God has called us to the ministry of reconciliation.
Yep.
So we've got to reconcile well. We have to repair well. We need to reflect after an interaction. Are we debriefing really well about how things are going? You and I just had that this morning in our one-on-one, and our thing is like, you know, there's some repairing that we've got to do. And part of that as well, we've got to get the right information for us to really reflect after an interaction. Did we ultimately deliver our promise as an organization? If we didn't, then what do we need to do in that space? We can't just move on. That at some level we're not fulfilling the heart of who we are as an organization.
Love it.
And then part of that is then readjusting our expectations and our supports. And again, this is a part of, you know, again, out of TBRI, a lot of these practices we practice with our kids. But again, I think there's some good macro practical steps in terms of becoming that connected organization.
Agree.
So that's kind of, you know, so when I think about us as an organization, we're still, and I think, you know, the theme at CAFO this year is becoming, that has been a big part of what we've talked about for the last few years as an organization, is we are becoming this organization. And so there has to be an openness from our senior leadership team to continue to lean into the nuances of what's working, what's not working. How do we truly become a flourishing organization? And that is our ultimate, that's our ultimate end game, because I know if we're flourishing as an organization, our foster families will flourish, or the foster kids that we serve will flourish. The people that we work with in prisons, the incarcerated, they will flourish. The church partnerships that we have will flourish. And man, it's so nuanced and it's so messy, but I do believe that with Christ in it, this is us being the church. It is us leaning into that in a way that, as we've talked a lot about, is redemptive. It's compassionate, and ultimately it's leading those who are lost to be found, where they can see the church and they can see people of faith being safe. I'd love for the church to be seen as a lighthouse again. You know, and I'm sure there's arguments that says what it still is. I get that, but there's significant work that we need to do to reestablish, to see the church as that lighthouse, as that safe refuge from today's storms and our culture and, you know, what we say about that. So I think all of these things that we talked about helps us get there.
I love it. I mean, it's been so good. And if you're listening, you're like, I don't need an organization or a church or a ministry, who could you share it with? There's probably somebody that you know,
right,
who could benefit from this. And so we'd appreciate you passing along. We'll post the slides that you saw in the show notes. And so you can see those quotes and all that. You don't have to take screenshots. And I'll just say for me, just Roy, I appreciate you doing this. I hope that when you go to CAFO, like people come and they have this conversation and they can benefit by watching this and getting kind of the fuller version. But I think it's just, it's self-probing stuff, right? Where you look at it as an individual leader and then across the organization, and it gets at the dark parts of you and the organization that maybe you don't want to look at, right? You open up the closet a little bit, and like, I don't really want to know what's in there. But when you discover that and you address it and you kind of walk through the processes you talked about, what's going to come out of it is a healthier, flourishing organization.
Right. Well, and I would say too, James, you know, if there, you need help, like I mean, I'll be at a coaching table at CAFO and, you know, helping unpack some of this with people and organizations, but even locally in our church, like if you just need someone to help process through stuff that you're going through, like give me a call, send me an email. I would be happy to do that. I would be happy to sit down with people to really help them, you know, okay, Roy, this is my situation. You know, what would you do? And I typically will say, well, this is what I would do if I was in your situation, or I would be asking these questions, or just helping people navigate this. Cause it's real. I think there's a lot of stress. I think like we talked about, I think so many people are leaving the pastorate right now because of this dynamic in and of itself. And I think in a highly politicized culture, you know, we even talked earlier about a recent book that came out, you know, that I think continues to talk about, you know, political agendas within the church. Like all of these things is to rob and steal the beauty of the church and why Christ established it. And we know that the gates of hell will not prevail against it. But my goodness, we have to do this better. And I think some of the things that we talked about allows a church to really reflect and assess, ultimately, are they helping fulfill and advance the kingdom? And if you're not, like again, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to have the conversation. And if anything, I'll just pray for you. I like, hey man, let's have a coffee or a drink or even over Zoom. And I mean, at least I can pray for you and you don't feel isolated and alone. I think a lot of leaders feel isolated and alone in this space, and we've got to talk openly about it.
I love that. I hope somebody takes you up on it.
Me too. Yeah.
Well, guys, if you've been listening,
thanks for doing this.
This is so good. And for those of you listening and watching, if you've made it this far, man, we love you for that. Yeah. Let us know what you think. Honestly, like hit that the button where you can give us some feedback. You can ask a question. You could reach us on social media. You can also email us at info@chne.org, and we'll get that email. Well, this has been good. Roy, thanks so much.